guys, you ever thought to yourself, gosh, there's a lot of new things that are happening in dentistry, especially from the pandemic. And I'm very aware that there's going to be some new changes, like the regulatory changes that happen with practices, but I'm not sure what they are and how do I prepare? Well, if you're asking yourself that question, I've got the answer today. I've got Linda Harvey, who has become a rock star for us in this great community on all things complex. So there are some changes on the horizon for dentists that they need to know about. And we're going to be talking about that in the Best Practice Show. So do me a favor, grab a pen and hit the share button. You're going to love this. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show. My name is Kirk Behrendt and I'm your host. And I'm so glad you're here today. Our job is just to bring you the best practices from the best dental practices all over. And the pandemic created some challenges for us in dentistry. And if you were like me, that was about a year ago and we really didn't know what was going on. We needed the help of some rock stars, and you're going to meet one of them today. Her name is Linda Harvey. She has become a rock star for us, and she continues to be a rock star for us because she's going to help us with the regulatory changes that every dentist needs to know about that are on the horizon. So do not miss this. Now, a couple things. We watched the metrics. Over 38,000 of you opted in for the COVID conference we did last year. And a lot of you are young dentists, new dentists, and even dental students. So if you're finding your way to the podcast for the first time, I want to do a couple things. I just want to welcome you to a very inviting community. We don't, there's no egos here. We're just all here to learn. And you're going to see, we don't have all the answers. I'm not even that smart. That's why I bring on my friends that are smart like Linda, and you'll see it's just a great community. So I want you to do me a favor. If you're listening on Stitcher or iTunes or Spotify, go down to that subscribe button. See it? Just hit it, because I want you to subscribe so that you can keep showing up every single week. You're going to see, I'm going to bring you a brand new expert in dentistry that's going to bring best practices to help you create a better practice and a better life. And I don't want you to miss out on it. Also, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, we have a private Facebook group called Best Practices by Act Dental. There's over 13,000 of you and climbing in there. And it's awesome because you can see other people helping other people in there. And you might have a question. You're going to see the conversation continues over there. And then lastly, if you haven't joined Act Dental U, or if you're just struggling as a practice owner, you're like, gosh, I need to think this out, maybe get my practice going. Check out actdental.com. We're a practice coaching company. We help dentists create a better practice and better life. That includes lowering the number of hours you work every year, limiting the stress that you have with your team, getting things organized. So if you just need somebody to talk to, join us over there. We are so happy to help you. Remember, dentistry is a great profession. It's how you practice that often becomes the challenge. So make sure you create a practice that makes you happy. And that's our business. That's what we do. So I want to introduce our guest, and I can say this about you confidently. And if anybody's been on, Linda, I kind of knew you before, and you've always been an incredible giver, just a great person in dentistry. And I'll just say this, it's been almost a full year now. And when a world in an industry that's so noble, we were panicking. We needed you. I mean, we had you on the first time, and actually I'm going to hold you responsible for this. We had our Zoom account and it only had 1,000 people on it. And the first time we had you on it, it maxed out. I'm like, there's 1,000 people on there. So we had to upgrade it to the 2,000. And then eventually, like the third time, we had a 3,000. Now that's not cheap, but that was like, there's 3,000 people on this thing. And every time you got on, it was like the feed would explode. And it was awesome how you could just calm us down because you were bringing real facts in a world where we didn't know what was going on. A lot of us were guessing. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I was fearful, and it was important what you brought. Now, I know who you are. A lot of people in our community know who you are. But if somebody's listening for the first time and they don't know who Linda Harvey is, give us a little insight. Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you, Kirk. First of all, you're going to make me blush with all those kind words. It was a pleasure working and helping everybody last year because it was totally insane. That's an understatement. I've been in dentistry a very long time. My roots in dentistry were as a hygienist. And then over the middle period of my career, I worked in medicine for 13 years where I obtained my risk management credentials and experience. And in 2005, I stepped out into my own practice of consulting and speaking and been helping private practices of all different sizes across the country since then. So we love what we do.
Yeah, you do such a great job of it. And, talk about the why of what's happened. Can you give us some perspective? You've been on a wild ride in 1 year. What has happened and where are we now? And then we'll show dentists what's on the horizon. Give us kind of a state of the union of what we've been through in the last full year.
One of the things that we saw that happen that first and foremost was that we began to challenge ourselves in every single thing that we were doing in sterilization and infection control, questioning, was that the best way to do something? Because we realized that when we get stuck in our ways, when we sit there and go, this is the way I've always done it, that's fine, I don't have to worry, or my Susie's got it, or John's got it, whoever, the clinical team. But does everybody really have it? We realized that it took a whole nother level of competence in order to feel confident about the safety of our practices for not just our team members, but for our patients. We were trying to get them to come back into the practice and feel confident about being in your practice to receive dental care. So those were some areas that we saw that were really big changes. Just questioning everything that we did, the why, in addition to all the additional protocols that you put in place, from remote check-in to air purification systems to face shields and respirator masks.
Yeah. And it changed the industry. And, this is not new to dentistry. There's been a lot of disruption in the past. And dentists, one thing I know about dentists is they've always been resilient. They've always found their way. Now, can you speak to this too? Let's just, when I first met you, I'm like, oh, this is going to go on for like a couple weeks, All right, Linda, what are we going to do for a couple weeks before we get back to work? We had no idea this is going to last this long. Did you have any perspective on this?
Really, I didn't, Kirk. I had no idea how long it was going to last. I thought that the end of our COVID retreat is what I now call it, that we'd be back to some kind of quote normal. We didn't know what that would look like. But then all of a sudden we hit all the supply shortages and we still saw disruptions in that. And cases were just, started to come back again and resurged across the country in different states. And then each state was reacting differently with different protocols and different mandates and restrictions that they had. Fortunately, I'm here in Florida, so our weather really has helped us throughout all of this, and we're not feeling so secluded and isolated during the winter, for example. But no, I had no idea it was going to go on this long, and it's still going to go on.
Yeah. So get us caught up. If somebody's been living under a rock and they aren't aware, which there's a significant population of dentists who are like, I didn't know that. I'm like, buddy, this has been going on for a while. What has happened in the last year that we now know this is what dentists have to do? And then help us with the road ahead, because there are some changes coming that we have to be aware of.
You're absolutely right. Well, first and foremost, we learned how to close and reopen our practices in short period. Really short period, like an emergency period that we had last year. Here in Florida and in other areas of the country, we all have our unique weather conditions that we have to deal with. For us, it's the hurricane season. Up north, it's the snowstorm or melting rains and melting snow, in the spring. So we know how to deal with that, but we had to deal with it really fast and really quick. And so that challenged our thought process. We began to rely on other experts in the manufacturing field and our dental sales reps to help us, get through that. And when we came back, we realized we had to implement new policies and procedures, written policies and procedures, as well as the protocols. So we learned quite a bit about COVID-19. None of us, SARS-CoV-2 was the brand new novel virus. So we learned how we had to protect ourselves. We learned that OSHA put us, meaning dentistry, at the top of the list when it came to high-risk categories for contracting, airborne diseases in dental settings. So we realized that there were actually laws that were already in place, such as the OSHA's respiratory protection standard, that now applied to us in dentistry. So that was one whole new eye-opening. Was it mandatory? Was it voluntary? And we saw lots of different perspectives and ideas. I watched Kirk, I watched dental posts on all different Facebook and social media. We began to like just really kind of split hairs over what does guideline mean? What does guidance mean? And what are we supposed to do? And this says should, and this says maybe. It was totally confusing.
Yeah. And then you had individual states deciding. It was actually really, really complex. Now, I want to go back to a couple of things. You know, one of the things that we noticed was the supply chain was a huge limiter. Give us, are we in a place where it's starting to get caught up now? We're just not there yet. What's your perspective on that?
In some of the areas, Kirk, we are getting caught up. It just depends on what area of the country you're in and who you're working with, you know, what's happening. What I'm seeing is that if you work with one major supplier, then you are more likely to get your supplies on a limited basis, but on a regular basis. I noticed that offices that tended to shop around and didn't really have one supply company that was really had their back, they suffered a little bit more, and they began to look outside of dentistry to healthcare groups, you know, that sold PPE and other types of items like disinfectant wipes that we use in dentistry. They looked at other sources. And as a result of that, we started finding groups that may not have been as credible as they should have been for us in healthcare, period. You know, there was a lot of folks that were capitalizing on the COVID crisis, you know, selling products that weren't fit to be used in a healthcare setting and masks that were counterfeit. So we had to really, really step up a notch as far as our understanding and not just buy something because, oh, this looks like it's good. It looks like it's legitimate. We couldn't trust that last year. And even earlier this year, we saw the same thing happening. The Washington State Hospital Association bought 300,000 counterfeit N95 respirator masks from a well-known manufacturer that we all know. As it turned out, their distributor had no relationship with this manufacturer. And it wasn't until they drilled down to the lot number, Kirk, that they were able to figure out that these were a true counterfeit mask, and sadly. So circling back to dentistry, so the point with that is that we have to go a little bit deeper. And that's why we challenged, you know, is this disinfectant product really the best one? Is the way I've been using it properly? You know, I saw offices who thought they were doing the right thing, and they would use two different brands of disinfectant products on their equipment, either at the same time or simultaneously, or one right after the other, not realizing the harm it could do to the equipment and that you may be rendering each one of those products less effective.
Yeah. So give us the word on the street. Here's what we want to know. Like, what are you hearing? Because you are in high demand. I know that. I'm so lucky to have you today. I mean, you talk to a lot of people in the industry. What are you hearing, and what should we prepare ourselves as practices in the future here?
I'm following two specific things. One in the realm with the Office of Civil Rights and the Federal Department of Health and Human Services for HIPAA, and I'm following OSHA, some changes there. So let's talk about OSHA first. Under the Obama administration, OSHA was promulgating a standard related to infectious diseases. And for whatever reason, that got shelved or put aside. Now we're hearing from different sources that may be coming back, that OSHA may be promulgating a standard for infectious diseases. So we can expect to hear more on that. And when that happens, there will be a public commenting period. We'll be able to see and you'll be able to comment. You, myself, all of our listeners can put comments in and respond. That's the point of the public comment period. So we're just following that. We have heard a little bit of different approach or answers depending on who we ask with OSHA, exactly, because they're not quite saying as much yet. But I happen to have an acquaintance who helped to author the bloodborne pathogen standard. He was on that committee, many years ago. And he feels like it's being picked back up. So I feel like we're in that train. And if OSHA takes it a step further and starts an initiative called a special emphasis group or special emphasis program, rather, that means that they may take time to go actually investigate offices and do random inspections. Whether they will target dentistry or healthcare or what area they will target, that's to be seen. I can tell you that about 6 or 7 years ago here in Northeast Florida, where I live, OSHA had an emphasis program for ambulatory surgery centers, and every one of the ambulatory surgery centers in this area got inspected by OSHA.
Wow.
So questions there before I talk about HIPAA?
No, that was one of my questions is, one of the things I don't like about dentistry, it's probably the only thing, is that it's so fear driven, but I do want to talk about, and that's where data or just getting insight, the reality of being inspected as a dentist nationally? What do you hear? I mean, it is, first of all, you have to have your protocols in place. Let's not skip over that.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it's not, I have no idea. And that's why I'm asking you how, what's the likelihood of as a dentist having an inspection?
I wish I could put a percentage to that as if we were betting on a Kentucky Derby or something.
Right.
But the likelihood is that you're more likely to get inspected if there's a complaint filed against the practice.
Right.
So right now, OSHA does not have the manpower to go target dental offices. We know that they did in Tennessee probably 5, maybe 6 years ago. But Tennessee is one of the 20-something states that has their own OSHA-approved plans. So they have some more restrictive and more stringent requirements than the federal law, in some areas. So they targeted dental offices, but they did an educational program first to teach the practices. When we come in, this is what we're looking for. We want to help you. So let's come to these programs, learn what we're looking for, and be prepared so you can pass the inspection and be compliant. I think oftentimes we assume we're in compliance. And sometimes when I start speaking about, let's just say the bloodborne pathogen standard, and I take one little section that I want to really drill into, and almost everybody in the room I had no idea we weren't doing that right. And, many people are just sitting there still like, with this closed arm, appearance. It's like, okay, we got to come away from that idea and let ourselves think differently. Right. Kirk, I'm one of those individuals, and I'm going to probably tell my age a little bit here, but I was one of those individuals that lived through no gloves, mask, and glasses. I learned I was cleaning teeth with no gloves, if you can just imagine how gross that is now, right? But nevertheless, we had to make that change. And I was one of the last ones to change, quite honestly. I didn't want to wear exam gloves. I know these patients for years. Why was I fearful of them? But then I finally got it. We had young children. So this is the same way that we are now. We're making the changes in our PPE, and we can't be resistant to that change. And we have to be open-minded about, maybe OSHA's going to say that we're going to have to continue wearing respirator masks, and that could be what's required. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk about the civil rights piece of this.
Oh, God.
And what you're hearing and learning. This is it's an interesting time. And it's I think employers now more than ever have to be a lot more aware and sensitive to what's going on. And this is a piece of business that you just have to be educated about as a business owner and sensitive. And so what are you seeing on those sides of things as far as regulatory changes?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that you can know right off the bat, there's no way that dental school could even begin to teach even a fraction of what compliance is required in a dental setting. It's just too complex. So I'm thrilled, if you have students and residents that are a new dentist, listening to your podcast, this is awesome because then it gets them off to a great start.
Right.
So with the Office of Civil Rights, the HIPAA laws have been in place a long time, and it's not a long time, meaning the privacy rule since 2003, and that's the oldest law. But what else was I going to say there? It goes back to 1996 when it was first passed, but that being said, 2003. So it's more than just having your notice of privacy practices posted on your website or on your in your office. It's a whole lot more than that. So being mindful of what do these regulations require and understanding that you have to have information in place. I can tell you that I've for years have done presentations, Kirk, and I just feel like so many offices in the audience they probably don't have customized policies and procedures. They probably think their IT company is doing a security risk analysis for them, but they shouldn't because it's a conflict of interest, and they really don't know how to do one in most cases. And they have, and their training consists of just coming to a webinar or a presentation, and that's fine. But you have to be trained on what's going on in your office with your protocols. So
Right.
there's 3 pieces that are just missing. So already once this year, back in January, the Office of Civil Rights, or HHS, has Congress has passed the HIPAA Safe Harbor Act. And this is a really big deal that I think a lot of dental offices don't realize. This law is being promoted as incentivizing covered entities to be compliant. Well, the incentive is we're not going to give you money if you have policies and procedures or you do a risk analysis. You can't apply for a grant. That's not the incentivizing here. The incentivizing comes from the fact that if you have some kind of breach and you've been in compliance for the past 12 months, then we are incentivized at the federal level not to fine you. So that's where the incentive comes in, is to avoid a fine. There's things that are happening right now. I know offices, as of like even last month, as current as that, that have had a breach because their IT company wasn't watching the hen house as thoroughly as they thought they were, or they hadn't signed up for the level of monitoring services that they really needed in their practice. So that's
Right.
the first change that we're going to see. And then we can talk about some of the others in just a minute.
Yeah. Can I go two things? I want you
Mhm.
to go back to the conflict of interest. Can you explain that? Because I've heard that. And
Mhm.
then the second piece is this, and I don't know if this is true. I'm going to ask you, when you have a breach as a dental office, there are certain circumstances where you have to report that to
Yes.
the public. Is that
Yes.
true?
Exactly, Kirk. That's exactly true. First, the very first thing, if you get ransomware, we call it the blue screen of death, right? Is you turn off the computers. Most offices are going to pick up the phone and call their IT company. That's fine, but don't let them touch anything. That's the worst thing that you can do as far as moving forward because you have a crime scene now. When you think about ransomware and the demand for money, this is extortion. This is an international crime. So if you allow your IT company to come in and start restoring you back to business really quickly, they may unintentionally be destroying evidence because you have to have all of your workstations reformatted. So if that gets reformatted, then the workstation that was the initial target can never have the forensics done on it properly. So
Wow.
there are certain techniques that have to be followed. And many offices now, Kirk, are using IT companies that provide managed services, so they know more about this. But oftentimes, even some of the medium-sized, IT companies or even regional ones, they are not experts in handling a breach. They probably have handled very little. They may have restored practices, and that's their expertise to make the computers work and make everything in sync. And of course, the crisis is let's get the doctor back up and running as fast as we can. That may be the worst thing that you can do. So that brings us to the step that every dentist needs to have adequate cyber risk insurance coverage.
Yeah, I just got mine this year. Actually,
Yes.
as a result, and now this is very important what you're talking
Mhm,
about. In the
mhm.
state of Wisconsin, I can't remember the number, but it was hundreds of practices that were breached. Actually, a dentist who is a team member here, and
Mhm,
it was over a week and a half where he
mhm,
couldn't get into his computer. And he said, to
mhm.
me, he's like, you don't know how difficult this is. I didn't know who was coming in. We couldn't collect money. We had no information on them.
Wow.
And it was from a support company. It wasn't the software. It was us. So this is a very real deal and
Yeah.
it has a major impact. And so having that risk covered in some respects is crazy important, don't you
Mhm.
think?
Absolutely. And so if we're thinking about the same company, that company actually impacted almost 500 dental practices across the country.
Wow.
So that's how, and I want to give a shout out to our breach expert that we recommend, who's Debbie Carr. I think you've maybe had her on our show before. So I want to
Yes.
say she's amazing. She's handling a client for us right now. So that being said, yes, not having the right protocols in place and doing the wrong thing and not having enough insurance is really going to put you in a tailspin for a worse outcome. So start by checking with your malpractice carrier. This is take home information right here, right now. Start by calling your malpractice carrier, finding out what your cyber risk coverage is. What are the exclusions? What are the deductibles? What are you covered for? You must be covered for forensics because that could cost you as much as $50,000 at the drop of a hat.
Wow. No,
So, yeah.
make this super simple for me. If I,
Okay.
especially for me, like what does that kind of insurance do? Obviously, like the
Mhm.
forensics piece, but what else does it cover? And again, I just got it. So, what does it cover?
Well, let me talk to you about your insurance thing, Kirk.
There you go. There you
Just
go.
buying cyber risk insurance is like deciding what health coverage you want or how much auto insurance do you want. What deductibles do you want? Do you want to have towing? Do you want do you want to have what other kinds of amenities you want to add to this package? So being sure that it covers the cost of an attorney. Do you get to use your own breach expert or do you have to use theirs that they have? And if it's somebody like Beasley or one of the big companies, they may have a big breach company already. Are they going to pay for notifying your patients if it's reportable? Because the cutoff for notifying is 500 or more individuals, AKA patients. And then you have to notify the Office of Civil Rights within 60 days. Now, Kurt, please know that there are almost every state has some kind of privacy law. And the privacy laws in the states are not the same law as our federal HIPAA laws, but these laws at the state level can be more restrictive and stringent, and they include all businesses like retail and other types of industries. So if you're in a state that says you must notify your consumers or your customers within 45 days, then you have to meet a more stringent standard than the federal law. So this is why you cannot afford not to have a breach expert. And in order to have a breach expert and someone who's got your back and can hold your hand and lead you through it, like our Debbie Carr does, then you can be more at ease if the worst case scenario happens.
Yeah, it's so weird that you say that. Well, actually, it's becoming more and more frequent. I was at Seattle Study Club Symposium. I think it was two years ago, and I had dinner with a dentist from Oregon. He's probably listening, but he told me at dinner, I'm like, come on. He's like, no, they hacked my computer and they wouldn't let me get in it. And they held me for ransom for $40,000 in Bitcoin. I said, Bitcoin? He goes, yes. So I had my team of attorneys, and my team of attorneys said, pay it. I said, that's what they said. He said, no, I had to pay it in Bitcoin to have them release he goes, it was a huge mess. So these stories, they get weirder and weirder, Linda, but they're real.
They're very real. And I tell you what, and I love working with attorneys because they refer a lot of business to us too, as far as, doctors who need help with the remediation sanctions in a variety of different areas. So I always enjoy working with an attorney. However, attorneys are not breach experts in most cases, and they don't know how to lead an incident response team. So you need someone that can lead the team. And now the FBI is saying, don't pay the ransom because that's extortion. You're paying extortionist.
Wow.
So, but if you haven't had the right backup, because maybe doctors have been going at their own, they like doing some IT, and they got their friend or their son or their nephew, somebody kind of helping them on the side. And they're kind of this you break, I fix kind of relationship with someone. They're not covered. They are not covered. And they're sitting ducks. So when a cyber thief is going around the internet, going through their computer and just searching IP addresses, they're going to come up as, just kind of like that flashing red light. Here we are, come hack us.
Yeah, I think it's a non-negotiable part of any business right now. It's crazy how many, even last week we found, like, who is this person? They actually got into our computer, and I had to kick them out proactively. I'm like, I've never seen this before. So I'm hoping that's not a big deal, but that's incredibly important. What other things do we need to know that are on the horizon as far as the civil rights component of this?
Okay, good. Well, the Office of Civil Rights and HHS, they're planning to update the privacy rule. We've already seen the proposed document. The public comments period has been extended into, I forget the deadline, in May. So it's a lot of changes coming here. Just the tip of the iceberg from what I've read, and I've started reading this document, it's over 300 pages, are that there'll be some changes related to our notice of privacy practices. There'll be some changes as far as release of information. Right now, the federal law says you must give the patient a copy of their records within 30 days, and they allow you to have a 30-day extension. But you have to overlay that with your state dental practice act. So in Florida, ours is 30 days. So the first 30 days with HIPAA matches up with Florida law. But we can't go for that extra extension with HIPAA because it would put a doctor in violation of the Florida Practice Act. That date is getting ready to drop to 15 days from 30. That's one of the proposed changes. Nothing has gone into effect. I want to make sure the audience is really keyed on that this has not gone into effect at all yet. It has to go through the rulemaking process at the federal level. But to be prepared, we want to be thinking about some of these things. So the whole purpose of making the changes and updates to the privacy rule is to make it easier for patients to get their records. And that means that we're going to have to be more in tune to what these changes are and not be restrictive of patients getting their records. And Kirk, I want to give our listeners and viewers a couple of examples of that because I've seen it on Facebook groups. I hear it when I go into practice and do training. Oftentimes when a patient is trying to get their records from one group, one practice, wherever it is, there are roadblocks. And some of the roadblocks are, well, you didn't pay for those free x-rays, so we don't have anything to give you. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Just because you have a new special running and the patient came in for some discounted out or free x-rays and exam or something, they have a right to that information. We can't charge them $75 or $100 on the way out the door with a copy of them because they didn't pay up front trying to make up your loss. That is your loss. In addition, if the patient has a balance, you cannot charge the patient a fee for the x-rays. And I'm using x-rays because that's mostly what patients want for their next dentist.
Right.
But they cannot charge a fee equal to that balance. The patient is entitled to that information. And if they're going to send it electronically, in a PDF format or whatever format, then there's virtually no cost involved. So why are you trying to charge the patient $75 for something that's virtually no cost? If the patient filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, that would get investigated, And that office would get a slap on the hand for unreasonable fees for cost of records.
Yeah, that's good. That is, I didn't know that. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of dentists don't know that either.
Huge. That's huge. Well, what happens is it becomes an emotional issue, and sometimes it's an ego issue, if I can say that. But the emotional side of it is we didn't do anything wrong. The patient came in, we did everything. Our protocols were fine. We provided this quality service. We took good x-rays or, whatever the treatment was. And now the patient wants to leave you because they're not happy for some reason.
Right.
We've all known patients that are like that. Every practice has had one, that they shop around and they take advantage of the practice. And those aren't the people I'm talking about. We have to have radar up for those patients too.
Yeah. And if you own a business long enough in dentistry or any business, you know this. And I don't know who said this years ago, but it was brilliant. People that owe you money, they don't like you. So don't get into a situation where anyone owes you any money at all, and you'll just have a better career. And I found that to be absolutely true. Yeah. So number one.
Patients have the upper hand here.
They do.
They do. They can file a complaint with the Board of Dentistry. And even if there's no question about standard of care issues, which is always a good thing, you don't want any standard of care issues if you're the doctor, the board is typically going to find something wrong with your record keeping, and they're going to find some way to fine you, or I've seen it happen so many times that I've been working in this arena since 2003, and it happens routinely. So,
wow. Okay.
Something to be careful of. Yeah.
All right. I'm already starting to feel overwhelmed. What else? Is there any other things that we need to be aware of that are on the horizon in this area?
Not regarding HIPAA. I think let's circle back. We talked about supply chain shortages. So I'd like to just make a quick comment or two about that.
Absolutely.
So continue to navigate that very carefully. I think we didn't really fully answer that earlier. So I think we're leaving the crisis phase where last year there was hardly anything to be bought. You could barely get masks, and you were using them time after time after time. You'd wear your Monday mask for 4 Mondays in a week and then get a new one. I think we're out of that crisis phase with masks in particular. And we can move back more to, a contingency status where we kind of maybe use a little bit of extended use, but not too much. And we're not constantly reusing them over and over again. But where we're going to see the supply chain continue to be interrupted for a long period of time, and I mean several years, Kirk, are our exam gloves. This is a huge problem internationally. And last year at the annual OSAP conference, the Organization for Safety, Asepsis, and Prevention, they had a PPE panel, and one of the individuals was representing the glove industry. And he talked about, all those gloves are manufactured abroad because that's where the raw materials are. That was being done before it was the in thing to outsource overseas. And it just takes much longer to manufacture gloves than it does a flat ear loop mask, for example.
Wow.
So be careful with those gloves. Yeah.
That's too much to think about. Now, I am a big fan of yours, but I'm going to take the place of a 32-year-old dentist who's white. Okay. Linda, I got a busy practice. Like, I'm trying to work on teeth. I got to go home. I got 4 little kids and a spouse. And like, this is a lot to think of. If I shouldn't be doing this. What does your company do? Can you help me check these boxes? Like, if I call you, can you just help me get caught up? What do you do? How can I reach out to you? And can you help me?
Sure. We work with offices remotely and on-site across the country, and that makes it really easy so we don't have the travel expense if we don't need that. But we can walk you through and we can determine with our different analysis and intake forms where you are. So it's not about just selling a manual to sell a manual. It's about determining the need for each practice. Maybe you have a manual that just needs to be updated. Maybe you have no manual. Maybe you've had a risk assessment 2 years ago and now you need a second one, or you need a second opinion. So we work with offices at all different levels, whether it's startup or transition or just, even a mature practice. The ones that are super fun, I will tell you, every practice is fun to work with because they're all unique, right, Kirk?
Right.
However, the ones that you really see the light bulbs go off are those doctors that are new into their practices. So those of our listeners and viewers that are just beginning to open a practice or you're just getting out of dental school, what we can coach and teach in the areas of infection control is eye-opening. And so does many of my colleagues do the same thing. And they bring that level of expertise because of the experience, the courses that we continually take to stay up to date with all these changes.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that because I have a theory and I want to know if this is true. Because we find the same thing in coaching. When you're working with a young dentist, they get it. Like, some of them just get it right away. And I joke, and I want to know if you find the same thing. It's often not getting the new ideas in that's the problem. It's getting the old ideas out that's the problem. Is that true in your
Yeah.
space also?
Yes, it's when I did this earlier, I said they get married to their old ideas and they kind of sit back and nobody wants to change. And you go in and you have to explain, this has been in the law the whole time. This is not the proper way to do this disinfectant area or this sterilization process. And you share where that is. And we take them right back to what is in the law so we can say, we didn't just make this up. This isn't just Linda Harvey thinking you need to do more work. So Kirk, I want to quickly address your comment about the time constraints too, because I know doctors, you have an extremely busy day and there's a lot of moving parts throughout the day to keep it working smoothly, everything from the front, to the back and sterilization. So it's a matter of looking ahead and planning time in the schedule and deciding who on the team is going to maybe be the lead safety coordinator, and everybody else should have some kind of role or duties to assist that individual. So one, you never have all your eggs in one basket, because then if someone's out sick, things don't get dropped, things can continue. And if that person leaves, moves, or is out on maternity leave or illness, then you have your office covered and you're not in a deficit.
Yeah, I love that. And you helped us so much with that, because when all these things were popping up in the pandemic, I mean, we were all just like, somebody's got to handle that. So we were using the word called champion. So somebody's got to be the champion of that. Somebody's got to be the champion of that. And what was cool, it takes the old thought process when everyone is in charge, nobody's actually really in charge. And when somebody owns it, they can do the education, they can keep up on the standards. And I'll just say this, you're our champion, Linda. And I am so crazy grateful. And I know we're going to have you back and cover other topics. And this particular space that you're in is it's actually pretty dynamic for us. I mean, it's a moving target sometimes, especially, I mean, I've never been through a pandemic. Last year when this was all happening, my kids were like, what's wrong? I'm like, I have never been through a pandemic. You haven't either. So like, it's the unknown. And again, I'll go back to what I said before. Dentists this is an incredibly noble industry and they're very resilient. They'll find a way, but we need the help of finding our way through great people like you, Linda. So we're crazy grateful to have you part of this community. And I just can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here always. Thank you.
That is awesome. So stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else. I want to thank you guys for showing up at the Best Practices Show. If you enjoyed today, which I know you did, just do us a favor, hit the share button. I'm going to encourage you, if you're a young dentist or even a mature dentist, don't even think about it. This is stuff that needs to be handled with the help of an expert. Reach out to Linda. You're going to see she is just a rock star and a great human being, which is even better. And check it out. So we'll put all of her information into the show notes. So if you're listening on Spotify or whatever, just flip it up down to the show notes. You're going to see there's a link to her email and you can click right on there. That'll take you right to Linda. So thank you guys for listening. And until we see you guys next time, keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.